Hello, Phil May there in Germany. Have we got it right, Phil? Are you in Germany?
No, we're in Bern in Switzerland.
Oh, geez. That Europe, it's so small. Look, it's great to have you. We spoke to Dick the other day and he gave us his version of the Pretty Things story. We also spoke about Dick's other stuff. But Phil, I just want to ask you now, you were born in Dartford, is that right?
Yeah, well, I was born in Dartford in the maternity hospital, and I was living with my foster parents in a place called Crayford, which is about 3 miles away. That's where I started life, because I was brought up by my mother's half-sister. Although I thought she was my real parents at the time, I didn't know till I was 10 that they weren't my real parents. And then I had to go and live with my real mother and stepfather, which was a bit of a shock. So it was kind of a weird initiation into life.
That's Jack Nicholson's story as well. His mother was his grandmother, if you know what I mean. His mother...
Right. Also, I saw something about Eric Clapton the other day, and he had the same thing. He thought people he was with was his mum and dad, and then he was told it wasn't. I think in his case it was his grandmother. In my case it was my mother's half-sister.
You know, Phil, great artists, they become great because they had phony parents.
Maybe.
Did you grow up in that area or did you go somewhere else?
No, we were in that area. My mother and foster father lived probably about 20 miles from where I was at the time. But as a kid, I remember when I ran away back to these other people, I couldn't remember how to get home to the other people because I haven't seen anybody for 5 years. They kept me away from them and not locked me up, but wouldn't let me out on my own without some chaperone as I ran away. And when I did run away, I realised I hadn't the faintest idea how to get back, doing this 15, 20-mile gap. But I eventually got back, and luckily my mother allowed me to stay there. I was a ward of court until I was 16, so I couldn't officially make up my own mind where I wanted to be. So when I ran away, the fear was that she could just ask the police to bring me back, but they didn't. In the end, she allowed me to stay where I was.
Sounds very stressful for a young kid.
Yeah, but as you say, it's all grist for the mill. It's all in the book, it's all in the songs, it's all in S of Sorrow. Most of the stuff we do is autobiographical, so it's all gone down there, either in the book or in the lyrics.
Yeah, so I see your name is Philip Arthur Dennis Sebastian Wadey.
Yeah, could be, yeah. Nobody knows what the F stands for.
Unfortunately, some do.
Yeah.
Phil, so how did you get interested in music? Were you listening to it on the radio, or was there other influences, friends?
Well, only through friends, yeah. I mean, because I was at art school with Dick Taylor and Keith Richards, we had a musical appreciation society which consisted of getting jazz records in, and we'd play some jazz, we'd play some obscure folk, lead belly stuff, and then we got into Chuck Berry and the Bo Diddley and the Howlin' Wolf and the Muddy Waters. So, yeah, it was a sort of appreciation of music which we weren't hearing on the radio in England, for sure, or television. So we bring in collections, we each buy one record from America, and then we tape them all. So you'd end up with 5 albums, although you'd only pay for one, on a tape. And every, I think, Friday or whatever it was, we used to get together. And then this turned into kind of a small band. Dick and Keith became Little Boy Blue with Mick, because Dick was at school with me, because he probably told you. And so from our little art school, I was getting quite a lot of musical influence. And eventually, when Dick left the Stones, we formed Pretty Things. Through association and friends, really, that I got into music. I wanted to be a painter, really.
Well, what you've told me is not only were you a pioneer in rock operas, you were a pioneer in mixtapes.
Yes, I guess we were, yeah.
So they would have been reel-to-reels.
Yeah, oh yeah, God, yeah. On, was it Tiac? I can't remember, or Grundig. I think one of them was a Grundig with those tiny little spools, which are a nightmare because if they flipped off and unwound, absolute horror show.
Dick said that there were rehearsals going on in his mum's house, and so were you part of that band or that gathering?
No, not initially, because that was Mick, Dick. This is pre-art school, I think. And Dick and Mick obviously were at the grammar, and they had another friend from the grammar school, I think. And 3 or 4 of them used to get together in Dick's front room. It wasn't front room, they were called best room, because that was the room you only used when you had guests. And they were in there. And then eventually, when Dick left the Stones, the Pretty Things went into the same little room and had the same Jaffa cakes. His mum always used to hand round Jaffa cakes and a cup of tea halfway through rehearsal. That's where I had my first Jaffa cake.
You've got to tell me, what's a Jaffa cake? Because Dick mentioned it as well.
It's a sort of orange, it's got a chocolate coating, and it's got kind of orange jam in the middle. It's like a little cake, and it's very posh, because my family had never heard of Jaffa cake. It was quite upmarket, and when Dick's mum gave me a Jabba cake, it was quite a surprise. It obviously had a big impact on our music. Jabba cake.
The parachute cover, that's very orangey.
Yeah, orange, just the new grey, or whatever they say.
What were you doing while Dick was in the Rolling Stones for about 6 months? Were you just waiting, or did you have a little band?
No, I didn't think of even being in a band, because Keith got kicked out for not doing any art work at all. And I was actually a very promising student. They used to bring in classes from all over Kent, art school classes, to look at our work, because we were considered quite an elite, 5 or 6 of us. Because you get weeded out every year. People get kicked out till you're left with just a handful of people out of the 30, 40 that started. And we were considered to be showcase people. And I had a very high hopes of being a painter. I still love music, but painting was my first love. And then when Dick left the Stones, which was a bit of a surprise, it just picked up from there. I had a friend of mine on a building site, used to have to work, get some student money, and he was called John Stacks, or John Fulliger, and he lives in Melbourne now. And we will see him when we come over, and he'll get up and play some bass. And I brought John along to the art school, and what we did was, so few students attended classes, we smuggled him in. And when the guy was out of the room, we'd draw a leg or an arm of the model. And when he came back in, he'd think John had made this drawing. We'd all do a bit each. And we kept him smuggled into the art school for a while because he'd broken his arm. And he couldn't work, so he was off work, so we could rehearse. So we got the bass player in, we had a drummer at school, and we could actually start rehearsing, which was to become fledgling Pretty Things.
No one noticed that John wasn't a real student? None of the faculty?
No. They, as I say, they were so happy to have any people attend their classes. They were usually drunk anyway, because they used to spend a lot of time in the pub, these particular professors. They were a couple of old winos, I think. But they were great. But it meant that John could be around the school all the time, and we'd put lots of drawings under his arm in case he got stopped and his show work. But it was that kind of place. A lot of people just didn't turn up at all.
Do you still paint?
Yeah, well, I draw. Obviously, I did the SF Sorrow cover, but I did the latest studio album, Sweet Pretty Things Are in Bed Now, of course. That's one of my drawings. Still do it. We sell prints of my drawings at the gigs.
The Sweet Pretty Things album, is that watercolour? That sort of looks...
No, I used just 4 biros, red, green, black and blue. Just the 4 colours. That's all it is.
You know what you are? You are the Stu Sutcliffe of the Pretty Things.
God, I hope not. He disappeared, didn't he?
You better watch out. They bashed him in Germany.
Yeah, I know. I mean, I'm the only one who's been there all the time.
That's right. So the Pretty Things start, and you guys are very successful initially, and you have a great... I don't know, was that image... Did that backfire on you? Because you should have had more success judging by the quality of your material, especially in retrospect too. So what happened?
Well, I don't know. I mean, it's catch-22, isn't it? I think initially, when we burst on the scene, we were wilder, dirtier, scruffier, whatever else. We made the Stones look like choir boys. And we had a lot of hostile reaction from parents, and that was all good publicity in some ways. And why didn't we keep making hit records? We weren't the kind of writers that Jagger and Richards were. They were like a kind of hit factory, those two. They kept turning out fantastic singles. We weren't interested so much in singles. We were more for the long haul. And as soon as we could, we got our direction and started on SF Sorrow. And we became princes of the underground. We got adopted by this new wave, and we were at the front of it, and it was very exciting because we'd had enough of Top of the Pops and 3-minute singles. So we found our new career with SF Sorrow, really. That was our kind of mojo.
You didn't miss Brian Matthew on BBC introducing you? No, here's the Pretty Things with...
He was great. They still have it. They had it up not too long ago. It was on Saturday morning, somebody said to me, and he was fantastic. You weren't always there, so it was something people told you about. He was an institution.
He only died a year or two ago, too. He was quite old.
Yeah, as I'm saying, he was broadcasting a couple of years ago. He still had his show, I think. I never listened to it because I don't listen to the radio very much, but somebody said to me he was still doing it on a Saturday morning, and now, ladies and gentlemen, we have the Pretty Thing, or whatever it was, he was introducing.
Dick sort of explained quite a bit about SF Sorrow, so did you create the story first, then the songs?
Basically, we were looking for another way to make an album, which wasn't 5 A-sides, 5 B-sides. We wanted something that was overarching, where you put the needle on one side and then you went on a journey until you took the needle till the record finished on the other side. But it was all part of it was a whole. And we started that off with a 8.5-minute single attempt with Defecting Grey, which was like a maquette. It had lots of different incidents within one record. A complete disaster, obviously, commercially, but for us, it gave us a sense of direction. And the story started the whole thing off, and then as we were working, the music and the story pushed each other. So it developed on the studio floor, and I suppose in my head, and they moved in parallel.
I was too scared to tell Dick my favourite album because my second favourite album is SF Sorrow, but SF Sorrow, I'm lucky enough to have one of those Gravestone vinyl covers, original.
Oh no, that's a rough cover. Just had my painting one.
Hey, blame the Americans. What can I say, Phil?
Tamla Motown.
But I just love the Parachute album. That is just a brilliant album, brilliant songs, and you've got the songs joining up there as well in a few spots. This is when Dick left to follow greener pastures. How did you start off Parachute?
Funny enough, because when Dick left, it was like a kick in the balls. I mean, it was a blow because SSR not doing what we'd hoped it'd do, then Dick leaving, but in retrospect realised that instead of pushing me over the edge and killing my enthusiasm, Wally and I had already started writing Parachute. So that was on the bench, getting ready to go, and so I had something to drive on with. And Norman Smith did the same thing. We caught our breath and picked up the baton again and went with Parachute. That sustained me in the business because otherwise I think I might have folded and just left it.
Was there any particular incident that inspired you, or how did you come to Parachute?
Again, short stories. The Good Mr. Square was a short story about somebody who didn't have any friends, so he used to cut out famous people, or not necessarily famous people, and kept a scrapbook of friends that he'd stick in the book, and they populated his life.
I thought the Good Mr. Square didn't have any hang-ups.
In the story, where he came from, his hang-ups weren't... He didn't have hang-ups because he had this other life. Life wasn't a hang-up because he lived in a fantasy. In his world, there were no hang-ups. People weren't nasty to him. They were cut-out figures, and they were nice to him.
There was some guy in 1975 who worked for Rolling Stone who said that Parachute was the album of the year in 1970 or 71, which was, I don't know, it was all made up, and now people think that Parachute was the record of the year, even though it deserved to be a record of the year. Do you know any of that story, how that came about, Phil?
No idea. We were told that too. We were told it was. EMI told us it was. Yeah, it was very weird. I mean, I don't know. We were told that, and we had no reason to disbelieve it. So, yeah, I know nothing more than you do, I don't think.
Did Tamla release Parachute as well?
Did they release Parachute? I don't know. They must have had the rights to it. Yeah, I don't know whether they did, actually. Because, I mean, there was a terrible kerfuffle about us being stuck with them. And it was only, you scratch my back and we want the pretty things. If you want Tamla Motown, we want the pretty things. And we were a bargaining chip. We got badly burned by that.
Who arranged the Motown deal? Was it your record company in England?
No. Steve O'Rourke, who was then working for the Brian Morrison Agency, was in America trying to get a deal for the pretty things with SF Sarah. And everywhere he went, there were phone calls saying, please ring Barry Gordy. And he eventually said, listen, it's a white band and they're playing psychedelic music. What on earth would Tamla Motown be interested in? And it turned out that EMI said whatever deal Steve O'Rourke gets, Tamla Motown will better it. So it's a fait accompli.
Oh.
We were handed over as a gift to Tamla Motown.
Well, they did sign up Kiki Dee, though she was singing soul sort of stuff back then, so...
I always thought I was a bit soulful.
Maybe Barry Gordy was a big Rosalind fan or something.
He's bonkers, I don't know. I mean, we've just seemed such a bad fit. It was like an arranged marriage that was was off the scope. And also because they dragged their feet and came out 4 months after Wassett had released Tommy, which made us look like we completely copied Tommy. So that destroyed SF Sorrow completely in America.
However, Dick was telling me a few stories about how he'd come across people and they would say, once they found out who he was, SF Sorrow is my favourite album, my brother's favourite album, I think that's just brilliant, blah, 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 blah. So, and I was just reading, before I called you up, Phil, I was reading on the internet. Now, we know the internet is always right, but apparently the reputation of Tommy isn't what it used to be, and that SF Sorrow is on a par, or maybe greater, reputation-wise, than Tommy.
Oh, I think that's undoubtedly true. I mean, I think the thing about SF Sorrow is kind of much more of a serious bit of work. whereas Tommy was not flippant, but it was a commercial property, and obviously it did very well. SFSO was a slow burn, and all the better for that, I think.
After Parachute happens, then Freeway Madness, that was another record company?
That was Warner Brothers.
But in between the Parachute album and Freeway Madness, you signed up to the Led Zeppelin boys label.
Oh, yeah. Swan Song. Yeah, it was great. It was a kind of honour to be the first band. They approached me before the deal was done because they didn't want their name used just to make a kind of vanity label. And they felt that if they could choose and control the kind of product that that company would put out, once they were given those guarantees, they would go ahead with it. Until they got those guarantees, it wasn't going to happen. They wanted the I's dotted and the T's crossed. And when eventually, about 6 months later, they came back to me and said, we've got what we want. Will you sign? I was obviously very happy to.
Did they sign you guys before they even signed themselves, maybe?
Well, that wasn't about them. They were almost an entity unto themselves. We were all Atlantic Records. That was where the money came from, and that was what was behind it. Army Ertigan, that was what was going on.
Those two albums, they're very underrated, I think, Silk Torpedo and Savage Eye.
I don't know. I mean, I think it's really hard to ask an artist that because you're outside the thing. I don't know, really. I like them. It was a strange cock rock time, and I don't know. I mean, we had a fantastic time while we toured and made it and made the albums, and we threw ourselves into it. But in some ways, there was hedonistic overtones which soured it all. In those days, the music business was being really very uncool. It was throwing money at stuff, and it left a bit of a bad taste in the mouth. And all the bribery and stuff was going on. It wasn't a great time for the music business. I mean, it was a great time for the business, but not in terms of some of the stuff that was going on was pretty shabby.
Did they at least give you a good budget to work with?
Oh, they were fantastic. There was no holds barred. No problem. Limos everywhere, and it was good, fantastic. Bit hedonistic. It was wasting money, really.
That's the 70s. Did you go and tour America and promote the records? Because they did quite well.
Yeah, we did about 3 or 4 tours.
They did quite well. Chart-wise, they got into the US album charts, which was good.
Yeah, Billboard.
After Savage Eye, what happened?
I left the band. We had a big fight. There was too much cocaine going around. Cocaine's not a very nice, conducive drug for harmony. And also the fact that halfway through the tour for Savage Eye, when it was in the charts, somebody sabotaged the second half of the tour and hadn't sent back the contracts signed. So we got halfway through the tour, and the rest of the tour didn't exist. It was on paper, but it didn't exist. Gigs with the Beach Boys, gigs with all sorts of different people, ELO and the Zeppelin, and we were in the charts, and suddenly we had no more work. There were no more bookings, and we watched the album fall out the charts, like somebody took the chair away, and we watched it plummet down the charts. You weren't playing anywhere.
Phil, then you became a fallen angel.
Yeah, not half. Another interesting story.
Did you finish the record, the Fallen Angels record? Because there's a few tracks on YouTube.
Yeah, no, we did. We completely finished it because I felt sorry for the guy, because when I joined it, they had one song. That's all they had. And I joined them, and I said, can you play me what you've been rehearsing for 8 months for? At a huge cost. They even rehearsed for a month on a yacht in Monte Carlo. And they played one song, and I said, and? They said, that's it. That's the only song we've got, Fallen Angel. I wrote with Wally the rest of the album, and with Billy Lovelady as well, I think. But we wrote the rest of it because they didn't have any material. And all they've been doing was buying new guitars and new piano keyboards, and they've been spending the guy's money like water. At the end of the day, he tried to sue me to make me sign my life away to get the album released. And I said, I'm the last one to join, and all the guys had by this time buggered off with the equipment they bought, and I was left holding the baby. So what I said to him was, I'll finish the album, and I'll do a couple of shows for you to try and get the thing off the ground, and that's it. And he still tried to sue me. So in the end, because the contract was so one-sided, he couldn't go through with it. He couldn't sue me. So in the end, he lost out.
Who was throwing their money away like this?
Godfrey Bilton. His dad built all the roads. Bilton was a construction company. He had a motor racing team, he had everything, helicopters, and he just threw money. He wanted a vanity, he wanted a band, so he threw money at this band. Tried to save his ass and get him some money back, but in the end, for my goodwill, he tried to sue me.
Then you guys get together with a really, really good album called Crosstalk.
Love it, one of my favourite albums.
It's a great album. You guys had been dormant for 4 years, and it sort of came out of nowhere here in Australia that the Pretties had reformed, and this album, Crosstalk, Tell us, Phil, about Crosstalk. How did it come together?
Well, Pete Tolson and I, again, wrote some tracks. Funny enough, Dave Gilmore lent us. He had a very nice house with some stables and equipment. We started working there, Tolson and I, and we knocked up about 3 or 4 songs, and I packed my suitcase and I went to America and lived there for almost 11 months, hawking my wares. And eventually, a good friend of mine was Rick Gitlin, whose father was Murray Gitlin, who was the treasurer of Warner Brothers. And I was staying at their house, and one day Murray said to my wife, "Phil's over here with tapes. Why hasn't he played them to me?" And she said, "Well, Murray, English people, we're not like that. We keep our friends as friends, and he would probably embarrassed to use you as a stepping stone." So anyway, he made his people listen to them, and they gave me a deal. Got a deal with that. We came back and finished the album.
Where were you staying in America?
In Hollywood.
Where else?
His son and I used to play tennis. His son was in the Junior Davis Cup American team. I was a good tennis player. We used to play stoned out of our minds at 7 o'clock in the morning. We'd rock up at the Beverly Hills Tennis Club and play the executives and thrash them. And they couldn't believe it because we'd been up all night at the Roxy, and then we just went back to the room, changed into our tennis gear, and headed for the courts. Played blinders.
And so basically, Phil, ever since the Pretties have basically been together, would that be right?
Yeah, Dick and I, we had that 10 years apart, but since then, the spirit of the Pretty Things, the flame's been burning. Not always very brightly because the circumstances or people's personal lives have interfered a little bit, and we've never gone in the studio to make an album because we have to. We've made an album because we felt we had something to say. We've never been pushed by a record company to make an album, and so they come when they come. And if we've got something we think is worthwhile putting out there, because it takes a lot of money, a lot of blood, a lot of sweat to make an album, if we think it's worth the effort and that people might put some ears to it, we'd do it. But we've never done it just because we feel we should. We haven't made an album for a year. We should get in the studio and make an album. It's not the way we've worked. That's why our output's been spasmodic, but it's been when we felt we've got something pertinent to add into the ether.
It may be spasmodic, but it's consistently good. The Sweet Pretty Things, it's a great album. It sounds fantastic, Phil.
A lot of it's quite live recording. We went back to analog and we put it down onto the tape. Sometimes I had to sing the song again because the drum track leaked into my microphone, but basically we played it on the floor all together like a band.
It sounds great for it. And Balboa Island isn't to be sneezed at either. That's a good one too.
I think there's some good merits in that. And Rage.
Rage Before Beauty. Are you speaking about yourself again?
Yeah.
We're sorry to see that you retired.
Quite emotional in places, and it's been fantastic.
Phil, there's a guy in Australia called Johnny Farnham, and he's huge. I don't know if you've heard of him, but what he does is he does these farewell concerts, and then 6 months later he changes his mind.
Who knows? I mean, never say never.
Yes, exactly.
James Bond says, I've got a health problem, haven't I? I've got emphysema. And it means that the 2 hours on stage isn't my problem. It's the 6, 7, 8 hours we're going to do today to get to the next gig. That back to back to back to back. I don't get very much recovery time. Sitting in a truck or sitting in a people carrier, it's not very good. What you need to do with emphysema is you use it or lose it. So I need recovery time. I've been in the swimming pool this morning and I will go again this evening. And on the road, it's not very conducive for keeping yourself in shape. I don't mean muscle building. It's just keeping the old lungs working. What lungs you got left?
Do you have to take oxygen at all?
No, thank God, not yet. But it's chronic. It will get worse. But we'll see. Fingers crossed.
That's from cigarettes, isn't it?
Yeah. And everything else I've taken, I suppose.
but you've stopped the smoking, though, I hope.
Oh, good, yeah. When I was lying in a Spanish hospital, I did, yeah.
Anyway, look, Phil, I just want to wish you all the best. Now, Dick said, even though the travel and touring is difficult, but you still will be producing fabulous records, is that right?
I think we will still be making music, don't worry about that.
Great. And theprettythings.com for people who want information, and there's a beautiful SF Sorrow box set, which you've put out.
Yeah,
fantastic.
Looks great.
Looks great. Sounds great too. Okay, Phil.
Look forward to seeing you all.